Thom Hartmann, our friend, host of the Thom Hartmann program, which you can hear, of course, on this very channel every day. He's a New York Times bestselling author. And please subscribe to his Substack, The Hartmann Report, at hartmannreport.com.
Hey, Dean. It's
Right?
so nice to see you. And by the way, thank you for, I was out of the country for the last 2 weeks and I reached out to you and said, what do I do if I get stopped on the way into the country? And you were kind enough to offer me a lot of advice and hand holding and a
I
link
was
to a
doing my best
friend.
to help you.
Yeah, God
I was
bless
also preparing to move to the 3 o'clock slot, though, just so you know.
you. Okay.
The
Well,
noon slot. I'm like, all right. He
what
gets
can I say?
held. I moved to noon to 3 p.m. right before Michelangelo Signorelli. I'm like, all right. So
So that's why you hooked me up with that lawyer who works out of a parking garage in Tallahassee, right?
that's right. Of course, everyone knows who that lawyer is. That lawyer is Danny Savalas, who's a regular on her show, who's
Yeah.
actually a very good lawyer. But no, Tom was, so Tom, let's talk about this for a second. You emailed me, you're on vacation, you're
Yeah.
supposed to be relaxing from life, and you're actually concerned sincerely that you might
Yeah.
not be let back in the country. Have you ever had that concern before in all the years you've traveled outside of the country?
No, no. I mean, I've been concerned about the government coming after me before, and the government has in fact come after me before, but that was back in the 60s. Um, it really, in my adult life, it has not been an issue. But enough people are
What does
getting
that say
harassed.
about America? But what does that say about this was an organic, sincere concern? It's the
Yeah.
same concern I've had where like Hassan Piker, who's a left-wing host, this young guy on YouTube, very popular. They kept him for hours. He's, Muslim and he's a US citizen born here. They kept him for hours. And that's a concern that I have to think about just a little bit. Like, what are they going to do? Are they going to try to go through my phone? We should not have to think about that as US citizens. But that's the climate that Donald Trump has created on purpose.
Well, and apparently I read one news story that they've gone through in the last year over 48,000 phones.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe the number was 38,000, but it was one of those two numbers. I mean, it's just like apparently this is becoming quite routine. And I don't know how often it's applied to American citizens. I'm guessing probably infrequently. But yeah, I'm not immune from being concerned about the power of government. It used to be a conservative canard. The government has the power of guns, and they're the only legal authority that can take your life or, and take your freedom. But it's true. It's true. So,
It's look, there's a reason that dictators and tyrants and wannabe dictators and tyrants do this, create this climate. The goal is that we self-censor, right? We all know that they don't have to put 20 million in jail, put a
that's right.
thousand political prisoners in jail, and the goal is to deter others.
Putin only has 1,400 political prisoners.
Yep.
And he has shut down the whole damn country. Orban, only had to prosecute two people for posting against him on Facebook, and suddenly everybody just went quiet. All they did was publicize it.
That's it. You make it spectacles. You don't hide it. That's why Donald Trump signs executive orders proudly and boasted, I'm going after these law firms. I'm going after Chris Krebs, Comey and Brennan. Yeah, maybe they should be behind bars, and his DOJ is looking into them. The goal, if you did it hidden, it's punitive, but it doesn't have the message they want. And that's the message we're dealing with here. So when you were outside the country, I'm not exactly sure where you went, but it's up to you to share it or not. But what was the view like of the United States of America? Did you talk to people in those countries?
Yeah, Louise and I were in England, Norway, and Iceland. And um, uh,
Nice.
yeah, we had more than a few conversations with people. A lot of them were like, tour guide types or just, people that you'd meet. But there's a genuine horror across Europe about what's going on in the United States. Something close to terror. And the tourism, of course, into the United States is down radically. Canadian tourism has just collapsed, but general tourism is down. Yeah, it is not people outside the United States. My sense of it is that people outside the United States probably have a better idea of what's going on here than most American citizens. Certainly, anybody who watches Fox.
Right. I think when you're outside of the country, you're seeing the big picture. It comes to you. There's no partisanship in your point of view. You're not rooting for one side or the other. You're just watching America backslide into something that does not resemble what this nation has been and its aspirations of what it should be. I mean, always needed to be perfected more. But they're seeing a Donald Trump who's using the power of the government to punish enemies. They're seeing him
Well,
do these tariffs to crush the economies of other nations. I mean, you go down the line, the way they're treating immigrants and demonizing and building concentration camp in Florida. And that's not the last, it's the first. It's got to be
well,
alarming to anyone who knows history.
yeah, and the big revelation that I got out of this whole Epstein blowback that Trump is getting from the MAGA crowd is that when you read the some of the right-wing publications, it's really clear a lot of these people had no idea that Trump is all over those Epstein documents. I
Oh,
mean,
wow.
literally had no friggin' idea. And the reason why is because they've been living in this information bubble. They've been, listening to Fox, watching Fox News on television, listening to Sean Hannity on the radio and, right-wing broadcasters, and listening to right-wing podcasts. And, that stuff has been in the news over and over and over again. I mean, for what, a decade and a half now. But I really believe that, well, I don't just believe, I mean, it's fairly obvious from the way that they're responding that they thought it was all Bill Clinton and Bill Gates. And they wanted to nail those suckers, right? Those Democrats, the pizza parlor, where they've got the kids and they're draining their blood to get the adrenochrome so that they can shoot it up, like Hunter Thompson told us about. And I mean, they are convinced, and many of them still convinced, that this was all about Democrats and democratically aligned elites like Bill Gates, and they are shocked that Donald Trump might be trying to cover something up or hide something. I think it's a come to Jesus moment for a lot of these people. You mean I've been lied to all these years? You mean they've been hiding this from me? Yeah, yeah.
Let me ask you though, Tom, and I'm talking with our friend Thom Hartmann. Say it comes out that Donald Trump's name's all over that. And then
It's
maybe
already come out, Dean.
right. No, but I'm just saying his base finds out he's good friends with Jeffrey Epstein because they never knew that before. And he hung out with him and all that stuff. Do you think they really go like, well, that's the line. I'm leaving now. Or is it more about how do you keep the file from us? Seems to upset them. I think they would still fall in and defend Donald Trump. They'd be like, well, okay, he did things 20 years ago. It's locker room talk, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, let me give you a nuanced take on that, or a little bit of
Sure.
nuance, if I may. The According to the reporting, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the pictures. Daily Kos did a great piece on this. I think it's still up today, of when the FBI or the Florida police raided Epstein's home in Florida, and they had this safe, and they had to crack the safe. And what they got out of this big box of videotapes and terabytes of data, 5 full terabytes of data on his server, a bunch of thumb drives, photographs, things like that. And and according to the news reports, based on that, and according to the FBI reports, he had wired his mansion, which was just down the street from Trump Tower, where Trump used to literally just walk down there all the time and just spend the day with him, for years. And as well as the house that he owned in Palm Beach, which was right down the road from Mar-a-Lago. He had wired the rooms without anybody knowing. Obviously, Trump didn't know, for both video and audio. So let's assume for a moment that there actually are videos of Trump, like with a 13-year-old, and or multiple, 14 or 15-year-olds or whatever. We've had several testify, and they've recanted after being threatened, but we've had several, girls testify to that effect. One of them ended up committing suicide, Virginia Guffrey. And so let's assume for a moment that Trump knows that these things exist, or assumes that they have to exist because he actually did that.
Right.
If it's the case, that could explain to some extent, or maybe even to a large extent, why he has been so aggressive these first 6 months of his presidency about locking down the Republican Party so there's absolutely no dissent, about creating a police state, about decapitating the senior leadership and prosecutors and investigators at the FBI, about decapitating the senior leadership of the Defense Department, because that's the one thing that's really the one thing that is like the unforgivable crime, porking children. If he believes that that's out there and that could come out and it could be leaked, that that could explain an awful lot of Trump's behavior recently. What do you think?
Hmm. I think it's plausible. I don't know what's in there. I think that it's plausible that Jeffrey Epstein, who I read other reports was secretly recording people, and that Donald Trump's at least having sex in the rooms there. If they're children or not, if it's other affairs he was having, he just knows it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
As I put on an article I wrote and talked about on even on MSNBC, whatever is in there is so bad for Trump that he's willing to piss off his base to keep it secret.
And
So we
that's my
know whatever it is that it's bad, right? And Donald Trump's been lying nonstop. I want to remind people of the facts. I was on Ali Velshi yesterday, and I know you go on Ali Velshi show as well. And I like Ali. Donald Trump said in 2019 he was never on the Lolita Express, which is the airplane of Jeffrey Epstein. In reality, the Giselle and Maxwell trial, in that prosecution, federal prosecutors introduced the flight logs, showed he was on it 7 times at least. And a pilot testified under oath in that trial that Donald Trump was on that plane. There's
a
no doubt
lot of
he
young
lied
girls.
about that. So there's a lot of things going on. He's lied about it. But by the way, Tom, taking one step back, what do you think about the idea that when Epstein is videotaping it, it's the blackmail? And maybe that's how he made money from people. And maybe it's also he was a foreign asset for an intelligence agency for another nation.
I think all those things are quite possible. I would put the blackmail probability way above 50%, the foreign asset probability probably below 50%. Although he was cultivating, foreign contacts, and he was in tight with a bunch of people in the Middle East. He was in tight with a bunch of Russians. He was in tight with a number of Israeli oligarchs. So but I think the blackmail is, and maybe not even just blackmail like you're going to give me money, buddy, but more like blackmail like you damn well better defend me, or you damn well better not out me, stuff like that. And frankly, I think that Ghislaine Maxwell, somebody needs to be keeping track of her,
Oh,
because
yeah.
if she suddenly suicides, or falls over dead from a heart attack or something. I'm not going to be surprised in the least. And she, by the way, has come out and publicly said she has never been asked by any government official to tell what she knows. And I mean, this was in the paper today. And she is more than happy to testify before Congress as to everything she knows. That's got to be putting the fear of God in Trump.
And they're going to kill her for that. If
I
dead in days, then
I
they
fully
kill her for
expect
that.
it.
Right. And look, I mean, there's a reason. It's very weird when you connect the dots here. And this is not conspiracy. These are facts. If you want to give us an explanation of the facts, that might be the conspiracy. But there's no doubt that the U.S. attorney, Alex Acosta, in 2008 under Bush in Florida, who gave a sweetheart deal to Trump and didn't prosecute and let the state do it, ends up being Donald Trump's Secretary of Labor in the first term.
Exactly.
And there,
His reward.
there's questions in 2019 about was he an asset of a foreign government? And I played the clip on my show. And Donald Trump, I mean, Acosta did not point blank say he was not. He said, don't believe everything you read on the internet. And it was a non-denial denial.
Right.
It wasn't a denial at all. It really wasn't. And I played it on the show last week for people to hear that. There's a lot going on. So Jeffrey Epstein blackmailing people that were powerful, end up keeping the man out of jail, who there are thousands of victims. DOJ in that memo on Monday last week said thousands of victims. How did you not discover it? How did Pam Bondi, as AG of Florida from 2011 to 2019, not see
Where he was imprisoned.
child? I'm sorry.
Where Ghislaine Maxwell is imprisoned right now. Excuse me.
Right. So, I mean, you've got Pam Bondi, folks, who's protecting Trump now, who was the Attorney General of Florida from 2011 to 2019, while some of this sex ring is going on. Because once he got released from the first term, there were reports that he went back to his old ways. So this is going on in Florida and in New York, not far from where I live on the east side, where he had his house up here. And how did no one put any tabs on him after he gets out of jail? It's too hard to believe, to be blunt.
Yeah, it's not credible. It's simply not credible. And then of course Bondi, what a couple of weeks ago said, or maybe a couple of months ago, I've got his book on my, all the stuff on my desk, and there's thousands of pictures and, yeah,
Thousands of documents. She said, I played the clip on Sean Hannity. There are thousands of pages, thousands. Now, and in that same appearance, Tom, she mocked Biden for not being transparent. We're transparent. Transparency to them is thousands of documents. You get zero. That's transparency. No one likes it. So look, this story is getting some legs. I wonder how far it goes. Trump called Charlie Kirk and told him to stop talking about it because Charlie Kirk said that on his show today, made press. He's like, well, the president called me and I think it's time to talk about other topics. So the elite leaders of the GOP, the millionaire leaders are saying, shut up, base. We don't care what you think anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Not surprising. I don't think it's going to work. I think, this, something's going to pop here. Something's going to pop. Either Ghislaine is going to die, and all the documents and the terabytes of data and the pictures and all those videotapes are going to vanish. Either there's going to be a complete cleansing, which may have already happened, with the Ghislaine being out of the picture, or something's going to come out, and then there's going to be this moment of truth for the GOP and for the Republican base. And like I said, I think so many of them, including a lot of these politicians, people like Ron Johnson, I mean, who has come out and said the only network he'll watch is Fox. So they've been living in this bubble so long, they have no idea, or only the faintest inkling, that Trump even knew, oh yeah, rich guys hang out together, they go to parties together, but not, not really. He's not really, porking those girls. It's something's going to happen here, Dean. Something's going to happen.
And Fox News, as of today, has stopped talking the story because that's where the Trump supporters only watch. So they got their directive from the elite as well, telling them, look, your corporate media, we need you to do this. And of course they did it. But last week they were talking about it. Last week on air, people were talking about it. And now it just shut down, even though a turning point, the Charlie Kirk conservative seminar, jamboree, MAGA youth movement over the weekend, they were all up in arms about this Epstein file. So I'm chatting with our friend Thom Hartmann. So Tom, to change gears for a second, we had people calling earlier. We were first talking about Superman being woke and how that pissed off the right so much, and that just brings.
Yeah, Louise and I saw the movie on Saturday. It's
What were you
great.
thinking?
I think it's about Palestine, or Gaza.
I heard someone say that. That's interesting. I don't know. I mean,
Have you seen it?
Was in development for years. No, not yet.
Oh, you got to see it.
It's been developed for years, so I don't know of Gaza, but I heard some people say that.
I think the bad guy is Bibi Netanyahu.
Well, he's as bad as you get. There's a villain.
I mean, there's two villains, right? There's one guy who's the politician, and he's Netanyahu, in my opinion, and the other guy is the tech bro billionaire, and he's Elon Musk. And it's just so and yeah, the movies are in development for a year or two, but both those guys have been around for more than a couple of years.
I will tell you this, according to my fiance, that in the Israeli press, they're saying it's about Israel and they're viewing it as an anti-Israel movie now. But then again, a lot on the right in Israel are like MAGA. It's all victimhood. If anything that slightly is uncomfortable, you're coming after us. Like with the MAGA world, the idea that it was a pro-immigrant movie and that Superman was woke. Superman was created to be a social justice warrior. He was created by a Jewish immigrant and a Jewish American in America, 1938, while Nazis were ravaging, and it was about a guy who was an immigrant who came from Krypton in search of a better life in America, and he was not documented. Let's put it that way.
Yep. And that's in the movie. The feds come and arrest him for being an illegal immigrant. And
they do? I didn't know that. Tom just ruined Superman. Damn it.
Well, I read that in the New York Times, so I'm not blowing up the movie.
All right, that's fine. But no, let's talk about Alex just for a second here. We've talked a lot about Nazi Germany. We've talked a lot about Hitler. I had an expert. Well, I really recommend. I'll email you, Andrea Pitzer. She wrote about concentration camps, a 2017 book.
Yeah, I read about that in your newsletter today on Substack. You really got the newsletter that everybody should subscribe to. It's free. Sign up now. Yeah, I did. I read about it.
And I'm Venmoing money right now. Thank you. So here's the thing. she talked about this being a concentration camp, but she also talked about how frightening the parallels are about concentration camps through time. They begin with dehumanization. They begin with first demonizing that turns into dehumanization. It's always a group of people that are painted as the enemy, and that it doesn't end just with camps. And you have Republicans celebrating alligator Alcatraz. They're selling merch. The Republican Party in Florida are selling merch. They're taking pictures outside of the gates, selfies here. Thom, I mean, you're a student of history. How concerning is this for you to see this playing out?
I'm waiting for them to put the sign up over alligator Alcatraz. This is our bite. Work makes you free. Because Trump has already said it's going to be, or the officials have said, or maybe it was DeSantis, this is going to be a work camp. We're gonna rent these people out for labor. I mean, which is of course,
Wow.
how the all Auschwitz didn't start that way because it was explicitly a death camp outside of Germany, but the 500 plus concentration camps within Germany, Dachau is the first, were explicitly work camps. And so yeah, I'm calling it alligator Auschwitz.
That's right. In the book, her book is called One Long Night. And in it, she talked about how the Nazis actually invited the press to come visit Dachau, the first camp,
Yep.
and to show them it's fine. And the New York Times came in and wrote like a kind of a medium article about it. Now, it was not a death camp yet at all. Those 5 years later into Hitler is when the Jews were really rounded up and put in death camps. At the beginning, it was more like people like you and me, Thom. It was more like socialists or communists. I'm not saying we're socialists or communists, but we were political dissidents. We would have been in that camp to be re-educated, and some were let go, and some were killed in the camps.
Yeah. And Dachau, I mean, I used to live in Germany. I lived just up the road from Dachau, well, about an hour. And I visited Dachau 3 times. So the first time was just, me and my family when we first moved there. And then the second and third time was when my parents came over and visited and when some other friends came over and wanted to go see it. And it was never a death camp. I mean, in the end, there was one particular slaughter. I think they murdered several thousand people by machine gunning them into a trench. But that was when they were in the covering up the evidence stage. There was a crematorium there, but it was built in the second or third year, and it was because so many people were dying from cholera and yellow fever and just being worked to death. And you had Mengele doing his stuff. I don't recall if that was a Dachau or not, but um, none of the concentration camps inside Germany were the death camps. They were all in Poland or in Holland, so that Hitler could have, plausible deniability. So I just the parallels are startling, and we also have an external camp, and I mean, this was a tradition that George W. Bush started with extraordinary rendition. Sending people to foreign countries where they were murdered. They were tortured to death, and we know this. I mean, it's well documented, and of course we've got Gitmo as well. So the historical parallels are just shocking. When we lived in Germany in the 80s, I read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Scherer. Everybody should read that book. And now it's been 40 years since I read the book, but it's something that stays with you pretty vividly. And my recollection of it is that I'm constantly getting these flashbacks, these deja vu moments when I'm reading today's newspapers about, oh my God, this was in Scherer's book.
That's interesting. I have that book, and it's a huge, thick book. If people haven't seen it,
That's about
and
800 pages.
has a huge swastika on the cover, which is weird to be sitting in New York City and reading it like I'm reading it outside.
You can get editions that don't have the swastika.
Reading a huge with a huge swastika on. And I assume, like, I would get people would walk by and I quickly hide it like I was hiding some kind of contraband, because I'm like, here, I'm on Manhattan. There's a lot of people who are Jewish. It would be very unnerving. And I'd be like, it's not pro, it's anti. And so, that's I'm not getting.
The other book that everybody should read is They Thought They Were Free by Milton Mayer. That's the really shocking book. And you've probably read quotes from it in my newsletter, because I quote him at least every 4 or 5 months. I try to throw some quotes from that book in. Milton Mayer was a Jewish reporter for the Chicago Sun before it became the Sun Times. In the late 40s and early 50s, and I think it was 47, 48, maybe anyway, around then, after World War II. He went over to Germany and spent several months there and befriended 10 people. One was a bricklayer, one was a baker, one was a college professor, one was a police officer. I don't remember all 10 of them. And spent like weeks with each one of them doing in-depth interviews. And the entire book is just these in-depth interviews. And the college professor is he was the most articulate of the bunch. And his point was that, everything happened so fast that you couldn't keep up with it. The press couldn't keep up with it. And yet at the same time, it was all being done under the guise of improving the nation and rebuilding the middle class and putting Germany back together and building the Autobahn and inventing the Volkswagen and he said there were genuine reforms and Hitler did put the economy back together. And in 1937, when Hitler was on the cover of Time magazine as the man of the year, he was literally the most popular politician on earth, as Shearer reports in his book, and as the New York Times praised him for being. Now, of course, this was before he had invaded Poland, but it's like again, I'm telling they thought they were free is the title of the book. The author is Milton Mayer, and that's Shearer's book is like 700-800 pages. They thought they were free is only, I don't know, 150 pages. You can read it in a weekend. And
okay, Milton Mayer. I'm gonna get that book.
it'll give you bad. And as a talk show host, it'll give you a hell of a lot of very juicy quotes.
I'm reading it. I wrote it down. I'm getting it, Thom. So, Thom, you mentioned in one of your newsletters something I covered on the show, and it has not gotten a lot of press, that Trump's IRS now says that churches can go out there and openly endorse candidates. They can do anything they want for candidates. They've reinterpreted the Johnson Amendment to do anything you want. And the concerns that I voiced to people, to listeners and other experts are bringing it up is that, so now you can make a tax deductible donation to a church. It's tax deductible and be really a campaign contribution, which is concerning in its own right. And churches, look, I'm sure in churches, they were talking about politics before. That was never an issue. It's the endorsement. They could run commercials now. They could do anything. They could be a super PAC, a church that's just created to be a church, which is nothing more than a super PAC. So your donations are now tax deductible, is a way to get around the campaign election laws where it's not a deduction. So this is something that can actually happen here as well. So
that hadn't occurred to me when I wrote about it, but you're absolutely right. And it's fairly easy to incorporate a church and have tax benefits. I mean, it's not particularly difficult. And there's a whole bunch of people who built empires doing that. Jerry Falwell, Billy Graham's son, Franklin. Yeah, wow. Yeah. Yeah, that's not a good thing.
But I mean, what are your concerns though? But putting that aside, that now you're going to, and I don't think they thought this through now, because, at the mosques, they have elected, the politicians come through mosques all the time and speak. They never do endorsements. Now you're going to see, they think it's just the evangelical churches. It's going to be every religion can do it. I really wish there was still the wall in terms of the Johnson Amendment. But what are your concerns about this going forward?
Well, obviously there's political concerns that I think we just kind of covered that territory. My personal concern is really a more of a spiritual concern, frankly. I was very into religion when I was younger. I went through seminary. I was ordained as a minister. I was the preacher of a church for 2 years in Detroit. The pastor of a church. And I just this is such a violation of, I've read the Bible cover to cover 4 times. This is such a violation of the teachings, not just of Jesus, but I mean, going all the way back. And, and Jesus was so explicit about this stuff. I mean, he threw the money changers out of the temple. I don't need to recite all the stories that, they're cliches now, but it is, any church that is preaching politics is not preaching Jesus. The two are mutually exclusive by any rational interpretation of Christianity. And of course, churches can also be synagogues and mosques and, the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. But it just seems to me like the much of, in particular, the Protestant church or the evangelical church in the United States. And I had attended evangelical churches when I was young, but I never was evangelical. I was kind of more mainstream Methodist, but it just seems to me like this is turning religion into a death cult. It's destroying people spiritually, and that really troubles me. John Fugelsang and I have long conversations about this stuff, because his dad was a priest and his mom was a nun, and
Yeah.
uh, so uh,
Cool.
yeah. But anyway, those are my
It's,
thoughts.
it's it's also when you talk about the spirit, the other concern that some people raise, and I think is a very valid one, is that by keeping politics out of the church, you're keeping something inherently divisive out of the church. Now, what happens if the priest says we're endorsing candidate A in the primary, and half the congregation like we want B, and they don't feel comfortable anymore there? So you've taken away the kind of the community spirit of a place of worship and enter the divisiveness of a political campaign into a campaign. And maybe they're going to be smart enough to go like, we should not endorse anyone in the primary, but even the general part of your congregation, they're not all going to be to the right or the left, whatever they might think. And some are going to feel alienated and leave. So from a spiritual point of view, it's inconsistent with, I think, the idea of church or mosque or synagogue, whatever, being a community where we all get along and are there for
Yeah,
each other.
sadly, ever since the Reagan Revolution, I mean, Reagan hired George Bush, his vice president's son, George W. Bush, to reach out to the evangelical church because, Reagan never went to church, and George Herbert Walker Bush was Presbyterian, which is sort of not, and so George W. brought in Jerry Falwell and Franklin Graham and all these guys, and that was kind of the beginning of the end, I think, or that was the beginning of the great sorting. That was the time, the 80s was the beginning, and I noticed that very vividly. That was kind of the time that I was drifting away from religion, and instead I was doing international relief work for a Christian organization, Salem International out of Germany, and that was when your church affiliation could define your politics or vice versa. And when I was a kid, when I was growing up, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, that was very much not the case. You could go to an evangelical church and be a Democrat. You could go to a Unitarian church and be a Republican. Although Unitarians, they don't even believe in God, but whatever.
Or
You get my point.
I don't even know what that, right, of that.
Yeah,
I don't know what the subset of that.
there's an old joke about Unitarians. A Unitarian comes to a fork in the road, and one says to heaven, and the other side says to a debate about heaven, and the debate about heaven. But that's yeah. Anyway, I'm getting redundant here, Dean.
No, that's it. But look, it's interesting as someone yourself who's been part of the religious leadership at one point to see the concerns because there's political concerns, there's also spiritual concerns. I think it's very interesting you brought that up. Very last thing, Tom, and I want to get a sense of listeners to your show bring up as well, but a lot of people call up and are concerned. Will Republicans try to steal the 2026 election? Will they try to rig it? Some worry that they're actually going to cancel it. And that's less likely because even Putin has elections. It's about rigging it. Not you need the charade of legitimacy for an election. But what do you hear from people? What are your concerns? And any ideas what we can do? We're trying to make the best plan possible to be prepared for
Yeah.
whatever they might do.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that they are rigging it right now as we speak, and that the way that they're doing it is the same way that they won the 2024 election. Greg Palast did the math on this, and this was all statistics, by the way, and I mean official government statistics. And what he found was that in the months prior to the 2024 election, 4.2 million Americans, the vast majority of them Democrats, were purged from voting rolls, or when they showed up to vote, were not allowed to vote, or their votes were challenged in a way that their votes were not counted, and which included an awful lot of mail-in ballots. And that had that not happened, Kamala Harris would easily have won and would easily be president right now. And I'm hearing reports that that in red states that have big blue cities, like Texas and Florida and Georgia, they are purging by the hundreds of thousands right now. And of course, the Supreme Court in the Husted decision I think it was in 2018, legalized this practice of caging that for actually 25 years, the Republican Party was under a court order, a restraining order from doing. caging is where you send a postcard that looks like junk mail out to people, and the postcard says, if you don't call this number or if you don't return this card within a certain period of time, we will take that as evidence that you no longer live at this address, and we will purge you from the vote. The Supreme Court legalized that in 2018. And, so in Ohio, Huston had been doing this by, in the big cities, in Cleveland and Cincinnati, in largely black neighborhoods. And he got busted for it. It was a violation of this anti-Republican court order. And the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court said, no, that's cool. And so they're doing this now very, very aggressively. And then the other thing is that they're replacing the election judges and the election officials, who have historically been nonpartisan volunteers. My mom was one when I was a little. They're replacing them with partisan hacks, with people who are fanatics, and in some cases, reaching out to militia members for these things. So, I think the 2026 election, and in particular 2028, are going to be extremely problematic. And the big problem, of course, the huge problem, is that, as you well know, if because of the Supreme Court, if a state wants to take away your gun, they have to go to court and prove in front of a judge that there's a good reason to take away your gun because you have a constitutional right to your gun. But if they want to take away your vote, they don't even need to tell you. Now, in 1996, there was a law passed, or maybe it was 93. It was called the Motor Voter Act, the National Voter Registration Act, the NRVA. And in the preface to that, in the preamble to that act, and in the black letter actual text of the act, it says voting is a right in the United States. Every American citizen has a right to vote. And there are, some exceptions. States can remove that right from you if you're convicted of a felony, for example, or you committed treason or whatever. But they explicitly say it's a right. The Supreme Court ignored that in the Husted case, and has since ignored it. And the Republican Party, of course, has been ignoring it. And so, we have this right to vote, but we really don't have a right to vote. And until we have a right to vote, or until this, we get a Supreme Court that will actually recognize that in the National Voter Registration Act, we're going to have Republicans continuing to basically steal our votes, taking them away from us. And they don't have to, mess with voting machines, although it wouldn't surprise me if they did. They don't have to do that. They don't have to, grab the tabulators. They don't have to intimidate people. All they have to do is just send you a postcard. And if you look at it and think it's junk mail and throw it away, you're screwed.
It's remarkable to do it within the system, to use democracy against itself, use our democratic laws against the republic to bring it down. And look, in Texas, they're doing a special session to gerrymander in the middle, not after the census, now to create 1 or 2 more seats so that they're desperate to hold on to the House because they know they lose the House. Not only can't they pass legislation, the Democrats have subpoena power, and a lot of people are going to be forced to testify under oath, and they're going to impeach Trump every week. It's going to be a lot of fun in that regard. So, well, Thom, I want to thank you. We went long here. It's always great chatting with you. Check out Thom's show. I'm sure everyone who listens here are listening to Thom. Sign up for his newsletter, hartmanreport.com. It's called the Hartmann Report. Nice seeing you. Welcome back. I'm glad you made it back in America. We'll look forward to chat with you in the future, brother.